Hello, in this video we're going to be restoring Seiko's first diver's watch. This is the iconic 62 MAS. This watch is roughly 60 years old and is in serious need of a service. There's gunk and debris all over the watch, and to be honest, the fact it's still running is a testament to Seiko's quality. But running an unserviced movement can cause serious damage. So here to rectify this issue is my friend and professional watchmaker, David. David's actually very kindly also agreed to help me with the voiceover so that we can actually understand what it is that he's doing. So, hello David.
Hello.
Typically, you work in a laboratory type environment. Everything's very sterile. You've got state-of-the-art equipment and tools and machines. This is a little bit of a downgrade. This is an antique toolbox I found with a bunch of antique watchmaking tools. I don't know what's in there, whether it's any good, and whether there's even going to be enough stuff. And I think at some point you actually fashion your own tools to fix this watch.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I even got you to order a few more bits.
So when you get a new watch on the bench, what's the first thing you do?
Typically what I like to do is check the case, because that gives me a good indication as to how the watch has been treated and therefore what the movement could potentially be like. And this one was actually not too bad. You know, it's an old watch, it's a vintage piece. It's had a life and it's clearly shown, but there was nothing major that I could see from the outside. But obviously it's the movement that we're interested in. And to help me with that before I open the case, I like to put it on the timing machine to give me a reading of what the movement's doing currently before I touch it. This one, as you can see, is not very good. It's gaining over 2 minutes a day, very low amplitude. It needs a service.
Realistically, it's probably not been serviced for a couple of decades.
Yeah, potentially. But by the end of the video, hopefully, we're going to be able to fix that. And there you can see the movement there. On the whole, it's fairly clean. There's a little bit of rust around the edges of the case and the case clamp screws. So clearly, this watch has had some moisture ingress at some point, likely from the case back gasket.
So you immediately told me I didn't have the right tools. So you pulled out a knife and a piece of wood and you made something to help take off this rotor.
Yeah, that's right. So I use a piece of pegwood because whenever I need to touch the movement, you don't want to use your fingers. So pegwood is perfect for this. First of all, I've removed the rotor. The rotor itself was in good condition, only a little bit of corrosion, but nothing out of the ordinary. So we need to get the movement out of the case. So I have to remove 2 case clamp screws and the casing ring, which holds the movement in place.
That was the stem and crown coming out, and now you're able to tip the whole thing over and we can take a look at the dial. Now, this was the thing that drew me the most to this watch. Whatever has happened, whatever moisture has gotten in, whatever has failed, whatever over the course of the decades that this watch has not been properly protected, has caused this camo-like spotting on the dial. What is that, and have you ever seen anything like that before?
I have actually. It's actually fairly common, especially with vintage watches. So to me, it looks like a mixture between moisture ingress and UV exposure. Actually on this, it's very, very even and uniform, which makes it look pretty cool and unique. So the dial actually, for me, is the most important part of the watch, in that I have to be so careful with the dial and the hands. Granted, this one is vintage and they're not in the best condition, but you don't want to do anything which is going to compromise that or make it worse. So with the dial off, I'm now going to remove the hour wheel, which then gives me access to the cover plate of the date wheel. It's extremely important to have a very steady hand here. The reason being is because under this plate, there's springs that are still under tension, springs which hold the date jumper and the date change wheel in place. And if you're not careful, you might not ever see them again. So what I like to do is arrange things roughly in order, group things together. So, for example, have the calendar work in one position, have the keyless in another, have the gear train in another as well, and familiarize myself with the movement. So this is the spring that I was talking about. As you can see, very, very thin, very fine, but extremely strong. Off comes the date ring, and you have to treat that very carefully as well. Treat it like a dial because it's print, you can see it, and it's important. And off comes the date change wheel. So on this post, I noticed there was quite a bit of rust build up, which suggests to me that the oil has been contaminated at some point. So before I clean it, I'm going to use a little bit of Rodico just to clean the bulk of it off, as you can see. So this is the cannon pinion, and this is what the minute hand actually sits on directly. So I can set that to the side with the date change and the hour wheel. So next, I'm going to release the minute wheel, which is held down by a small cover plate. This is used to stop the minute wheel jumping up out of position. So with that removed, I can then check the freeness and the functionality of the rapid date change. This was in good condition, which is always nice to see. So with the majority of, or practically all of the dial side removed, I can then flip the whole movement over, which gives me access to the back. This large bridge that you see here is called the automatic bridge. This is responsible for the automatic work and self-winding. And as you can see, the watch is still running, which means there's still power. So before I start taking the gear train apart, I have to release that power somehow. So here I am releasing the power. As you can see, I'm lifting the click out the way and slowly releasing the ratchet. And you have to do this methodically. You can't do this in one go. You don't want all the power to release in one go. And as you can see, there's no more power in the watch. The balance has stopped. The gear train is completely still. We can remove the ratchet wheel and then remove the gear train plate. So now I'm able to remove the balance assembly. There's a knack to this because it's actually a very, very fragile and important part of the watch. So as you can see there, the hairspring, which is literally called a hairspring because it's the size of a human hair, that is very important because it's responsible for the timekeeping of the watch. So now that this is out, it gives me the perfect opportunity to inspect this properly. I'm using a 10x loop here, which is very, very intense. The reason being because this part is so small and so important, I have to make sure that it's in good condition. Moving on, I'm then going to remove the pallets. This is part of the escapement, which as you can see is that really odd looking little anchor, and it swings back and forth and is responsible for the timekeeping. And actually looking at it up close, it wasn't in bad condition. So what I do next before I take the rest of the gear train apart is I check for what we call in the watchmaking world end shake. This is the gap and play between the up and down movement of the wheels. This wasn't too bad, although the fourth wheel, the end shake was slightly too large, so I'll have to adjust this. I can then get to work on removing the screws which hold down the train bridge. This is usually the largest plate on the movement. As you can see, the barrel is also under this plate. Usually it's separate, but again, this watch was built to a budget, so they've made it into one plate. I found no major fault with this. It was just a little bit crusty, a little bit greased up, and it just wanted a good clean. This here is the escape wheel coming out. This is what directly interacts with the pallets. This is the fourth wheel coming out. And this is the third wheel. These wheels are responsible for breaking down the ratio of timekeeping, determining hours, minutes, and seconds. And there's even another bridge underneath this. Remember, this is quite a simple watch, but there's still quite a lot to it. So underneath this bridge is your center wheel. Next, I'm removing the barrel, which is the source of power in this watch. This is a mechanical watch, so the power is stored in this barrel via a mainspring. The disassembly process actually is coming towards an end here. There's not much left. I'm disassembling the keyless work. This is the part responsible for the hand setting position versus neutral. This is actually quite a densely populated little area of the movement, and as you can see, there's springs under tension here which have to come off in a methodical way.
I'm going to expose you here, David. I think we actually lost one and got down on our hands and knees and searched for it on the carpet.
Yeah, you're actually right there. So with your editing skills, it makes it look like we didn't spend any time searching for any missing parts. The final part to come off this movement is the crown and stem and the sliding pinion. I like to leave the stem in last because it's easier to manipulate the movement, flip it over, etc. when that's still in place. So the balance assembly, as I said, is the most fragile part of the movement. And when you clean the watch, you want to put this back in place. As you can see, the bridge is secure, the wheel's not going anywhere. And it really is the best way to keep this component protected during the cleaning process. So this particular watch, like most modern watches, when I say modern, I'm talking the past 100 years, they're fitted with a shock setting. And it's a spring-loaded system which keeps the watch protected. Well, it tries to prevent any major damage during any shocks or knocks or drops or falls.
So are you saying that before this, if you dropped a watch or a pocket watch, that could be it over?
Yeah, that's right. So particularly watches from World War II, in fact, almost all pocket watches, trench watches, pieces like that, if you gave it a significant enough shock, the watch will literally be a dead stop, and that will be it. So, of course, the shock setting is on both sides. It's actually a 3-piece component here. So you've got the brass spring, which you can see there, which is the flexible piece, which is the shock absorber itself. You've then got the organ and the cap jewel. These two pieces together hold oil in place for the balance staff. So that's it. Well, almost. With the majority of the movement here completely stripped and laid out here. Bearing in mind, this is actually quite a simple watch. There's still a little bit more to remove. As you can see here, I've gone back to the automatic bridge, removing all of the components here, of which we have the automatic drive wheel, we've got a pull lever, and we've got yet another cover plate holding it in position. The final stage of disassembly is actually the case. As you can see here, I'm using a grip tool and I'm removing the plexiglass.
So now we can finally move on to giving everything a clean. So ordinarily you see those sort of spinning machines. So we're not using one of those because I don't have one. Is this still going to do a thorough job?
It's doing the best we can with what we've got. So typically this process that I'm doing here using the pegwood and cleaning solution, I would actually do this in my real place of work. In fact, any good watchmaker should do this. The reason being is because the solution itself won't just get rid of all of the grime and gunk and old oil and debris. You actually have to manually clean it and remove it yourself. So once the majority of that thick grease and oil is gone, essentially, what I like to do is just brush it down, make sure everything's clean, give it a visual inspection, and then we can then move forward to the next component. So as you can see here, the rotor oscillating weight has some pretty stubborn oxidization, a little bit of pitting, but this actually isn't too bad. You know, it doesn't look great, but it's not going to affect the running of the watch, so this is okay.
I did actually see some replacements of these on eBay, like new old stock ones, but they were £150 each, which is insane. And I don't want this to be one of those like triggers broom situations where you just replace everything until it's no longer the same watch. So I actually don't mind the odd little bit of characterful oxidation stains. So there's just going to be a hell of a lot of cleaning now. So we'll probably just put on some smooth jazz and you can just enjoy this little cleaning montage. So with all of the individual parts from the movement cleaned, it's now time to move on to the case. And as you can see, it's pretty gunky. It's also quite battered. There's a couple of weld blobs on this crown side of the case. Potentially a repair had begun and then was abandoned, and now you have hardened booger-like blobs stuck to the watch forever, so that's great. There is actually a guy that might fix this who lives in Germany, so stay tuned for that, which would just be a hilarious trip to go to Germany. You can also actually see the holes for the spring bars are really stretched open as well. These sorts of watches were often on straps which are quite loose, and so that's probably been the cause of that wear. There's a O-ring or a gasket for the case back, which has gone completely hard. That should be providing a seal, so it needs to be spongy and sort of pushing out to make it waterproof. That's most likely going to be responsible for all of the moisture damage inside this watch. So David's actually going to have to chip this out. Is this a common thing that happens?
It's somewhat common, yes. I have seen it plenty of times, and it's just a result of the watch not being serviced either at all or correctly in the past. It's never a good sign. So again, I've done the majority of the gunk removal and getting rid of all of that nasty stuff by hand, But then just to top it off, I'm putting it in this ultrasonic bath, and I'm just going to let it sit and rinse in this watch cleaning solution.
And so with the case being left in that, we can actually start rebuilding the watch, which is super exciting.
So as you can see, I'm putting the main plate back into the movement holder. And actually the assembly process is the more fiddly, more intricate part of the job. The reason being is the oil placement and grease placement has to be perfect. Too little and the watch won't last its full service interval, and too much and it will run and end up in places that you don't want it. This is the center wheel bridge, which holds the center wheel. And I'm flipping it over here, exposing the underside. I'm going to start by assembling the keyless. The reason I would do this first is because it's responsible for keeping the stem firmly in place, which, as I said before, allows me to then manipulate, flip over the movement a lot quicker and easier. This is the cannon pinion. This is a stem, and it's quite tricky getting it into the sliding pinion. As you can see, it's hovering. I don't have any back support, so it's a tricky process. And then adding a little bit of grease to the connection points. The higher the friction point, the thicker you want your grease. So as you can see, I'm using quite thick grease here, and it's important because when you're manually pulling the crown in and out, you're giving it quite a lot of torque, and you're activating quite a high friction point here. So it's important that you use a thicker grease. I then have to carefully start rebuilding the keyless work. Well, you might wonder why it's called the keyless work, and traditionally it comes from the idea that the early pocket watches were key wound, so you had to access the winding and setting from the back of the watch via a key. Here you don't have to have a key, you've got your crown. I have to be really careful with this spring as to not allow it to ping out, disappear, and throw everything else with it. But with enough manipulation, that spring is in place, and we can grease that up too. Once that's in place, I will then flip the movement over. As you can see, this component here goes through the middle of the plate, out the other side, and then connects to my setting lever. Add a little bit of grease. Fit the jump spring together, screw it in place, make sure that's nice and tight. So this is an interesting component. This is the setting lever spring, which acts as the spring for the setting lever, so that audible and physical click that you feel when you push the crown in and out, it's responsible for that, as well as holding the whole of the keyless assembly in place under tension. This, of course, has to be thoroughly greased. As you can see, I'm being quite generous with the amount of grease I'm putting on here because you want that to be there in 10 years' time.
So this is the barrel. You might have seen we removed the spring from this, which pinged out onto my rug somewhere, lost forever. This is getting some grease, and then we're actually going to be fitting a brand new mainspring inside this barrel. That's just going to help have a reliable and constant release of energy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's important that you use a new mainspring every time you service a watch. You can fit the old one, but you're not going to get accurate and longevity from this old mainspring. It's fantastic. The packaging is designed in a way where the mainspring is already wound, it's under tension, and all you have to do is just push it straight into that barrel. With that now in place, you can see I've just placed the barrel arbor in position. Because this is such a high friction piece, it's important that this is greased properly and correctly. So as you can see, I put quite a bit of grease in there, closed the barrel together, and I'm now fitting it back into the movement where it's supposed to be. The next stage is starting to build that gear train back up. So first I start with the escape wheel, which has to fit perfectly underneath. Then on top of that bridge, I'm fitting the third wheel. I'm going to grease it up with a little bit of grease. You don't want too much, but then you want just enough. As you can see, it's fit perfectly into place there. Add a bit of grease to the barrel arbor. Again, it's a high friction point, so we want grease on that. So I can then put the train bridge back in place. And this is quite fiddly actually, because I have to then manipulate it in such a way that all of those wheels and pivots align perfectly. Before I tighten anything, as you can see there, I'm just aligning those wheels, those pivots, those staffs until it slots into place. I have to do this before I tighten the bridge down. Otherwise, I'm just going to snap the pivots and then we have to start again. I'm using an implement to help me, keeping the train bridge in place, stopping it from moving. As I'm tightening the screws down, the bridge can potentially have a tendency to jump out of position, move place, release pivots, and I don't want to be halfway through tightening these screws and hear a snap. The next job is to refit the ratchet wheel. As you can see, I'm placing it on top of the barrel arbor, which, as I spoke about before, is inside the barrel. What I'm going to do is tighten that screw, and as you can see, that gear train is moving nice and smoothly. I'm then going to grease it up appropriately. So I'm using an even thinner type of oil, which I'm going to use when reassembling the shock absorbing system that we spoke about before. It's an extremely fiddly process, in fact probably the fiddliest process of this whole watch. As you can see, it's extremely small. I have to make sure that I apply the right amount of oil before I put it together, which I'm inspecting now. Just look at the size of that compared to my eyeglass. It's absolutely minuscule. There it is in place, and then this is the shock absorbing spring. Again, an extremely fiddly process in which I have to fit all three arms back into that plate.
So you see two sides in now. Now I need to get the third in. There.
Adding a little bit more grease onto that sliding pinion and keyless setting before I then add the rapid date change wheel. Securing it down with another bridge. Tightening it up before I then run the crown and test that it's all working freely. Perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for when I've got it all together. As you saw before, the gear train was running freely when I put some power in it. This anchor, or the pallets, that is to stop that gear train running freely. Otherwise, time will be running much faster than you expect. Securing it with the pallet bridge. Making sure everything's in position, moving freely, adding that screw before tightening. With that in place, we can reinstall the balance assembly once and for all, and if I've done this correctly, it should start running. Of course, lining it up first. Finding that perfect bite point, and off she goes.
So at this point, the watch is actually running again. So all of the cleaning, all of the oiling, all of the greasing has now led us to this part where it's all beating again, but this time it's clean and it's going to last a lot longer and it's going to keep much better time. There's another one of those tiny little shock absorbing jewels going together. And honestly, this was just an unbelievably difficult thing to film. I'm going to make this about me for a second. Ignore what David's doing. That's mildly impressive. Filming this was a feat of accomplishment that I'm so proud of. No, I'm joking. It was a nightmare though, and I've got some much better lenses now. So if we do this in the future, it's going to be a lot easier to actually film. But poor David was having to listen to me going, slightly to the left, slightly to the right. Stop what you're doing. Hold. And while he's trying to build this minute, unbelievably fragile and complicated and intricate movement. So yeah, massive respect to David for putting up with me and building this watch again. So that is getting slid back into place. And this has been so insightful for me as well to actually learn how all of these parts work. And I'm not saying I've got any confidence to start doing this myself, but it's just fascinating to understand what actually goes on inside a watch.
So with the movement back together and physically running, I'm going to perform an intermediate timing test. As you can see, losing a minute a day is not a fantastic result, but that's fine. That's what I expect, because now is the time when I'm going to adjust this watch. As you can see, the fast and slow regulator there, I'm adjusting it here, which is why you can see those lines are starting to move. I'm going to keep adjusting that regulator until I'm happy. I'm not looking for perfection here, but as you can see, I'm now within 8 seconds, an amplitude of 270. I'm very, very happy. A healthy watch is somewhere between 250 and 290. So I'm more than happy with this result so far. Carrying on with the reassembly process, I'm now able to start putting together the calendar work. I'm going to use thick grease, putting the minute wheel in place, getting it into position, placing the hour wheel on top, ready for the hands to be fitted. And lastly but not leastly, I'll be putting the calendar work together. As you can see, the finger on that at the end is what advances the date forwards by one. Checking the tolerances, making sure everything's in place as it should be, putting that washer back in position. On goes the date disc, in position, making sure it's free, adding a bit of grease to that jumper. Now for another fiddly part, adding that date jumper spring in place. It's not too bad actually, it's not too bad. There we go, in place. A little bit of grease before I add the cover plate on top. Screwing it down, making sure it's in place, nothing's catching. Then ultimately I can add the final cover plate on top of that, which is held down by a final 3 screws. I checked it before, but I want to check it again now that the date calendar ring is in place. And as you can see, it's moving perfectly, it's fine, it's free. Adding a bit of grease intermittently to make sure that that date jump runs smoothly.
So with the movement put together for the most part, this is the dial going back down. I can't believe we are nearly finished with this watch. And it has even more meaning now that my friend actually serviced it and I got to be there and watch it. And this is something that I'm actually slightly more familiar with, because having built quite a few custom watches from AliExpress, this is basically just putting a dial onto a movement and then some hands, except this is a very old, very fragile, very delicate watch which has much rarer components that you can't just go back onto AliExpress and replace for £3. So David is now going to put the hour hand down. He aligned the calendar to 12 o'clock at midnight, which means that he knows the hour hand can go straight up. And then this is the minute hand going on as well. And ordinarily you would have an actual press that you sort of evenly press these hands down, but David is an expert, so he's able to use these hand pressing tools to push them all down. So with the hour and minute hand on, we can check for alignment, and it's absolutely perfect. And you're looking for a date change within about 20 minutes of midnight, is that right?
Yeah, with a watch like this, it's not an instantaneous date jump. It's a gradual date change, which is fine. So as long as I'm within about 10 minutes plus or minus, I'm very happy. But as you could see there, it jumped over within 5 minutes. So very, very happy.
So with the dial and hands now on, we can install a brand new old stock plexi. This is really where the watch, a vintage watch, comes into its own, because this is like encapsulating in a museum the history of the watch underneath this perfectly clear brand new plexi. This is not the best tool to be using. We managed to make it work, but ideally you want to be using a much better quality pressing tool than this one. We're going to give the inside a little dust, and then the movement can be dropped inside of the case. Obviously, the crown and stem need to come out so that it can be fully set back down. And with the movement now aligned, there's a case ring which goes in next. Now the case ring has tiny little springs that are kind of just basically bent metal. That's then going to be pushed even further down with the case back, but the movement and dial is screwed to the case ring. So you have to make sure that you bend those little tabs up, and then that will keep it from moving at all. So the case screws were a little bit rusty. We actually ended up replacing those so that they're nice and shiny, and there's only 2 of them. And with those in, we can turn our attention to the final part of the movement assembly, which is the automatic watch work.
So there's not much left to this actually. It's just the automatic work. As you can see, getting all the components out, that ball bearing system which makes the automatic oscillating weight roll nicely, the ratchet drive wheel in place, getting that pull lever in place. I have to position it perfectly so that it's either side of those ratchet teeth, ultimately retained by that bridge, screwed in place. And there is a final cover plate which goes on top and completes this assembly, held in by 2 screws. So before putting down the automatic assembly, I just have to add a final bit of grease to that jewel there, which is ultimately where the ratchet drive wheel sits and connects with the ratchet wheel. Again, aligning everything in position, making sure it's all as it should be, nothing's caught, nothing's getting trapped, and the final stage to press everything down. I'm going to rotate the automatic work here. As you can see, it just popped down, confirming that everything is in place and as it should be. And then those 3 screws can go down in place, securing the automatic work to the movement. And here we are, the last part of the movement assembly, adding that oscillating weight. As you can see, it's a large weight, large screw. Getting it in position is a little tricky because obviously it sits on top of that ball bearing system. But once I've got it in place, as you can see, holding it in place while screwing it down, and look at that, it's free.
So before we screw the case back down, we're going to be putting a brand new gasket into place. The last one obviously just disintegrated. So this is going to give it a degree of water resistance. It's not really recommended with vintage watches, especially ones that aren't going to have a whole pressure test done to them, that you actually take them underwater. But this will give it its best chance of being certainly water resistant, but to a degree waterproof as well. So there's also an O-ring inside of the crown. So we're going to replace that. You need to buy one that has had the O-ring serviced, because these new old stock crowns, the O-rings inside, just like the gasket from the case back, has gone all hard. So they're a bit more expensive. Again, they do exist on Yahoo auctions. This is now David cutting down the stem with a brand new old stock stem and a brand new old stock crown. And again, this is going to give it its best fighting chance of being waterproof/resistant. And this is the case back going back onto the watch. I am beside myself with excitement, and just wait until you see how good it looks. Okay. Look at that. It is absolutely stunning. You may have also noticed at the start of this video that it didn't have a bezel. This genuinely cost the same amount that I paid for the entire watch, which is just ridiculous. But because these are so old now, and there's just not many of the new old stock parts kicking about, a bezel like this in this condition is extremely desirable. So I did pay about, I think it was about $600 for the bezel. This is the bezel going on, which just finishes off the watch. Look at that. It is just absolutely stunning.
I'm really, really happy that you had me over to do this. It was such a cool experience, and you know me, my passion is vintage watches, and to be able to work on something like this is just incredible, not least that it's your own watch. So I just hope you're very happy with it, hope you enjoy it for years, and I look forward to the next one.
David, thank you so much. You're an absolute hero, man. This is the strap going on. This strap is a modern strap, but it's made to look like the old straps, the tropic straps that would have been on these watches originally. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you, a massive thank you to David. Without him, this would obviously not have been possible at all. Thank you so much, David. Thank you for everyone who's watched this video, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Goodbye.